All right. So a lot of people have asked me about Star Trek Picard. Um, Number one, I was gonna do a review with Leah, but it never happened. Um, and I just then I didn't want to do one, and now I'm ready to do one. Now I'm ready to talk about everything. Now that we have 5 episodes or whatever it is, 6 episodes, it feels like torture, to be honest. Have you ever had blue balls, like as a guy? Because that's what Star Trek is like now. It's like you sniff that little bit of good stuff, and you're like, oh, this is great. This is going to be so cool. And then you're let down immediately. It's like a constant, like, ooh, what's that? And then, oh, let down. Like, oh, what's that? That was cool. That was Star Trek. Oh, I'm let down. Um, I do see a correlation too with the new version of people, like people that don't like it, who say, "Man, this just isn't right." People's responses to that are like, "Fuck off and die, you shithead. Just go away, then, scumbag." Like those are the fans of Star Trek now. Star Trek fans are now like spoiled douchebaggy assholes. Um, this is not. These are not the people that they used to be. It used to be nerds and optimist type people, even hippie like people, but now people are just mean. They're just nasty people. It's that social justice warrior, like, give me, I deserve now. It's very weird and it's bizarre. I was really happy with, I don't know, man. This is going to be a rambling that I can't even imagine what I'm doing. Finally, I can tell you more about what I feel about this show. It's too bad because it started a lot better than it's going. The stuff with Data, the stuff with Picard was the stuff I really liked. Obviously, there was like a little bit of emotion to a story that we know about, so that made sense. I like the Vineyard. I like the Picard setup. I like, that Picard is kind of doing what we thought he would do, although not really, because he's that classic old white male recluse. Oh, I messed up something years ago, so I'm gonna go into hiding now. I'm not for 14 years. I'm not gonna go visit that boy that I was helping to train that I wanted to get off the planet. I'm not gonna help my friend Raffi or whatever. I'm not gonna be friends with her, even though we're both on Earth. I'm not gonna do anything else. I'm just gonna literally go hide on the Vineyard. Like, it's so bizarre. It's just like Luke Skywalker. It's just like every other hero or person you ever knew. It's classic. This is everybody now, especially if it's a male. It's just, oh, I'm a failure. Oh my God, I'm going to go hide now. And then a bunch of women will save me later and tell me why I need to get back up or why I'm wrong or something. It's just can't be avoided that that's what all these shows and movies have become. But whatever. Like, do you think I want to be here talking about this? And I know that there are some people that really grab hold of this and make entire channels and make entire podcasts and make a living now off of, anti-SJW, anti-Hollywood, anti all that stuff. And I know that. I know that some people are completely seeing all the bad in this because there is some really good stuff in this Star Trek Picard. There are things that are Star Trek. And one of the problems is that a lot of it is Star Trek. It's all the darker things of Star Trek. It's everything dark, everything bad, everything dark, everything. Every time back in TNG or back in the original series or in the movies, when they sort of did something that didn't quite line up with Star Trek, where they mentioned money maybe, or they mentioned, violence, or that there was conflict somehow, and you were kind of like, damn, I thought it was all utopia. Why is why is there this conflict here? But then they had to resolve it, and then they did resolve it. But this is like all of those times wrapped up into every episode. It's like in your face. We're cutting an eyeball out. People are swearing. People are doing this. And, somebody yelled at me, well, don't let your fucking kids watch it then, retard. By the way, this is a left-wing Star Trek fan in the comments. Well, then don't let your retard kids watch then. There's a cartoon coming out, idiot. This is the type of language that these people now use at you. And by the way, I use crazy language myself. But when I'm having a normal conversation, it's bizarre. You know what I mean? When you say, you know, if you're having a fight with someone, or if you're doing comedy, or if you're being silly, or if you're being, you know, crazy, you know, it makes sense. But when you're in a regular conversation thread about Star Trek, and you're just like, man, I can't even let my kids watch this. I grew up watching Trek with my parents. My parents grew up watching Trek, you know, with their parents, you know, like type of thing. It's not about swearing and this darkness and these things. Like, yeah, there are dark episodes of Star Trek and some crazy things, but they still keep it in the realm of Star Trek. You know what I mean? It's like my kids I don't want to watch a cartoon. My kids are never going to watch the Star Trek cartoon. I'm never going to watch the Star Trek cartoon. When I was a little kid, I watched Star Trek. And then when I got older, I watched Star Trek. And now that I'm 35, I still watch Star Trek. It doesn't need to have swearing. There's plenty of other movies that are great, swearing and murder, and I love it. You know, I love those movies. It's great. Horror movies, crazy sci-fi movies where they're violent. You know, that stuff I like, but this is Star Trek. That's the point. So you don't know Star Trek then if you're saying that. If you think, F you, your kids just can watch something else, then you don't know Star Trek. And obviously Kurtzman doesn't. This guy doesn't know Star Trek. All he knows is, hey, I like all these other things. Let me put them in Star Trek. Let's rip off the Mycenial Network thing or whatever the hell that was that they ripped off in Discovery. They ripped their main plot, their main story, their main whole thing. They ripped it off from something else. And every time they do this, it feels like that's pretty cool if it existed outside Star Trek, but inside Star Trek, it feels weird. And it's because it got ripped off. Just like, what's his name? I don't even know the guy's real name. I just call him Elrond, the guy they pick up here in Star Trek Picard. It's clearly that the guy loves Lord of the Rings. He's already said that. So then he puts something in there like Elrond or Elroy or whatever. I actually, believe it or not, I don't really watch Lord of the Rings. I never really liked Lord of the Rings, which is weird because you would think I'd love it, and people always give me crap about that. But that's one thing weird that I don't really like. It's a great movie, the series, but I don't know. Anyway, Alex Kurtzman loves it, but he doesn't love Star Trek. It's like imagine if I did Lord of the Rings, but I was like, you know what? Those first 3 Lord of the Rings movies, they really bored me. So how can we like make this cooler or whatever? And then like I brought like elements of space and fun action stuff that was different into Lord of the Rings and ruined the lore and ruined the characters and ruined everything. It's like, would Kurtzman like that? Would you like that, Kurtzman? You four-eyed idiot. Like, I would love to do that to Kurtzman. I would love to ruin Lord of the Rings for him the way that these people have ruined Star Trek for all of us. And this isn't just people complaining for no reason. There is a lot of substance to this. You know, when Brent Spiner and that other guy, I forget who the guy, was it John Logan? I don't remember who. No, it was somebody else. I don't remember. They wrote the Nemesis script. It's like you can't let actors write stuff because they want to write their own selfish reasons. Brent Spiner wanted to kill Data, so he did. He wanted to be done with Star Trek. He wanted to kill Data. He wanted to have that death scene, and he wrote, no coincidence, he wrote Nemesis, co-wrote Nemesis, and, you know, Data dies. You know what I mean? That's what he wanted. Which in the end, I actually liked that decision, by the way. I thought that was a good move. It really was a great ending to that. It was very sad. I loved the character Data. I want him to be back. You know, but anyway, and Picard now is like, I'm going to take on Donald Trump. And of course, I'm going to come back and take on all of this and that. And like, so, you know, Patrick Stewart has these, I want to show, you know, how we bow to women and how, you know, I'm an old idiot who had everything wrong. You know, the patriarchy needs to go, that type of thing. So he comes in and he's going to do that. So he's got an agenda. Then Kurtzman has an agenda to ruin something like he ruins every other thing he does, like The Mummy or Transformers or whatever, Into Darkness. Now, Star Trek has some little side Section 31, right? A mysterious, dark operating version of Starfleet that can do anything, and they're kind of evil in a way. Section 31. It's a side story in the Star Trek universe, right? In the big Star Trek universe, it's a small little side story that's not referenced too much, but once in a couple times it was referenced in the background in the old shows, and especially in some of the comic stuff and in Deep Space Nine or whatever. But so there it was, you know. But this guy's obsessed with it. It happened in a Darkness, Section 31. You know, has Khan or whatever the hell it is in Discovery, Section 31, and now it feels like in Picard they're going to show up again. It's like this is a minor little fucking group of things. And by the way, I always hated Section 31. I hated the idea of it. When I found out about it in Star Trek, I hated it because I was like, no, like, This is supposed to be this utopia, and Starfleet's better than this. Why would they do this? So that always irritated me, but it was such a minor little thing in Star Trek that luckily it never really came out. So I just was like, all right, I can ignore that because that's stupid. But now it's at the forefront of everything that's new Star Trek, and it's ridiculous. But anyways, let me get to Picard now because I don't know, man. I'm 35 years old. Started watching Star Trek in 1987, 1988. I was like 4 or 5 years old. Watched it with my dad. My dad died in 92. He missed the last season of The Next Generation, which is unfortunate because, I mean, we watched all the episodes. And I watch it all the time. I watch all the Star Treks. I like everything Star Trek except for Discovery and obviously the short treks. And obviously now Picard is a little bit of bittersweet. We'll get into that. And the movies, you know, I didn't mind the movies because even though the movies were ridiculous, they were entertaining. You know, I give them like 7 out of 10s. The new movies, I mean, the brand new movies, because they're an alternate timeline, you know what I mean? I kind of look at them as like a take on Star Trek. Like here's J.J. Abrams' take on Star Trek. Okay, that's funny. Like it's a movie, whatever. You know, but when you start playing in canon of the universe, that's where now we have problems. Now we've got problems. Episode 1, The Remembrance, I really liked it, you know, with Data and Picard, and for the most part. There's some things that I didn't like. There's a few little things I didn't like, but I like the dialogue with the younger people was a little weird. So I look at dialogue a little bit like some people would say, well, listen, the dialogue in The Next Generation was appropriate for the times, and this is now dialogue appropriate for the times. And you could look at it like a universal translator, kind of like that's not really how they're talking, but because we don't know what people are really going to talk like in the future, you know, we just make it easy to understand nowadays, and it doesn't matter. It's about the story anyway, the dialogue and whatever. I like that idea. But the problem is, in the 80s and in the 90s, you know, people did talk a certain way. Like, whatever, and dude, and what's up, bro, and dude, and yeah, wicked man, like, far out, and stuff like that. You don't hear people in Star Trek talking like that. People in Star Trek had a very sort of elegant, sort of above way of, like, I don't know, upper class way of speaking. Because we were evolved. We were evolved to a higher level of existence, and we were, you know, way better. Like, there was no poverty anymore. Nobody was starving. We had the universal translators and all these other things. Like, so we didn't have this way of talking, of swearing and as much slang. And so I always thought that's why it was like that. Because I remember I had friends who said Star Trek The Next Generation. They were like, oh, it's boring. I don't really watch that. It's a boring show or whatever. And part of that boringness was that dialogue, because they were executing a dialogue that was very, you know, visceral and very calm and very whatever. Humans were a little bit more, you know, I guess humans were a little bit more boring, you know, in a way, because we were more evolved. But that made sense for what we were doing. But that's exactly why in Star Trek Picard and in Discovery, they don't do that. The officers swear, and people have conflicts, and people get drunk and hook up, and people in the first episode of Remembrance in Picard say, hey, dude, your replicator's totally, like, drag, or, like, your replicator's, like, so tragic. It's just like, what the hell? But whatever. So anyway, those were little minor things in the first episode of Remembrance. But I thought it was a pretty good episode. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I think it's one of the better, you know, pilot episodes of a Star Trek. Unfortunately, it starts to de-evolve after that. Maps and Legends, the second episode, you know, I don't want to get into breaking down all the episodes. I'm giving you this kind of rough overview of what I think is up with Star Trek right now. Maps and Legends, they do this detective CSI thing. They find out some stuff. The End is the Beginning, I think, was a weird episode, probably the worst episode, I think. I don't know. Maps and Legends and The End is the Beginning, one of those two. I can't even remember now. Absolute Candor was the one where they got Elron or Elroy or whatever his name is, right? And I think that's the one. And he basically, you know, They're not absolute candor. The nuns on the planet, they're not absolute candor. They're literally just saying stuff. They're not actually being absolute candor. They're not using candor. Like that's the whole thing, and they're not really using it. So they're supposed to go to the Borg cube to find one of the twin android robots or whatever, but they keep taking time off to go other places. They take time off to see this boy that Picard abandoned forever ago, but now he's going to stop there. And like it's like every episode is a derailment to another thing, and it's just like, oh my god, man, I hate Raffi calling Jean-Luc JL. Like that's annoying as hell. I hate her character. I literally hate Raffi. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I hate Raffi. Like I want Raffi to die, like in an episode. I don't like Raffi. I kind of like, sort of like the captain pilot guy, Rios, because that guy has always been good in almost everything he's in. I kind of like him. I don't really know anything about him, though. He's just kind of cool, and that's really all I know about him, is that he's kind of cool, I guess. I don't know. And then the guy that Kurtzman ripped off from Lord of the Rings is kind of cool because he's got swords. And he like defends Picard. But then in the next episode, today's episode, he just has shot like guns and he barely does anything but a couple little comedy lines, I guess. Oh my god, man, this episode. They meet 7 of 9, but 7 of 9 is like a vigilante mercenary. No mention of Chakotay or what happened. And then she like 7 of 9 splains Picard, and then Picard is like, "Why are you doing this?" And then, "You shouldn't do that." And then at the end, she won't kill the person to get revenge, and then they go back to the ship, and then she leaves. But no, she actually went down to kill the person and then kill everybody. Like, I mean, just there's torture going on at the beginning of this episode with Borg eyes being ripped out of people. Just this is a nightmare at this point for me. Because, and here's why: it's because some of the show is really good. I think some of this show is really good. I heard the director, I forget her name. She's a female black girl. I forget her name. She's great. Like I heard what she said. I really like her. Like as a director, I kind of liked her, and as her, like what she talked about with Star Trek, I really liked. And then Michael Chabon, he's like the white guy with the beard or whatever. Michael Chabon seemed like he was a Star Trek guy too. But for some reason, even though these two people talk about Star Trek like they know it, when what they did in the show, it's like they don't know it. I don't understand. I'm not somebody who fully hates this show. I'm not somebody who fully likes it either. I think that there's a lot of people that are like, "Oh, it's the best thing ever, you idiot assholes." Or there's people that are like, "This isn't Trek. This kill me, my childhood," or whatever. I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle, and I feel like it's worse to be in the middle because I feel like 40% of this show is wonderful. I feel like 40% of the show is wonderful and is great. And I think that if this show was called like Old Man Admiral Returns to Space, it would still not be the best, right? Like if this show was called that, it would be like maybe a 7.5 or 8 out of 10. But because it's Star Trek, they're messing stuff up, and it's become Patrick Stewart it's become Picard along for the ride as we meet all these other characters, really, but we don't care. And Picard's along for the ride. It's becoming that. It went from all about Picard, oh, I'm so interested in Data and him and what's going on, and now it's just become ridiculous. And I have a feeling it's probably going to get worse, I guess, until maybe the last episode. Maybe the last episode will be interesting because that will wrap up everything and you'll get all the resolution or something. But right now, this is torture. Feels like it's moving at a snail's pace. On to the next little thing, on to the next little thing, to the next little thing. Like, this is why we need episodic Star Trek. This is so bad. And they're supposed to be getting to this place, and now we go to the side here for 7 of 9 for Bruce Maddox, this. And then we stop to get Elroy, or whatever his name is with the swords. And then in this episode, he's barely anything. He doesn't do anything in this episode. I don't know. It's just weird. It's 40% really good, I think, like between some of the directing, between some of the shots. But then there's directing and shots that are enraging, where they cut to something in the past, then the future, then the past, and the future, and they're cutting all over the place. Like, I mean, it's really friggin' insane. You know who? Oh my God, it's enraging. Like you see something in the future, and then they cut back to the past for a second, then they cut to the future again in the past. And like, I'm not talking about like, it doesn't need to be done that way, right? Like, I'm not talking about like we're going to the past and future and it's part of the story. No, like they're telling the story out of order for just art reasons, for artsy reasons. They're telling the story out of order. The only person that ever kind of did something like that with cutting when you're about to get a dramatic answer was the Fifth Element director. Something big was about to happen, then they would cut to something else. They do that in this, but it's enraging. I can't explain that any better. So, like, it's weird, man. Like, part of this show is directed fabulous. Part of the show is directed horrifically. Part of the show is edited pretty good. Part of the show is edited horribly. Part of the decisions are wonderful. Part of the decisions are horrible. Sometimes Picard seems like Picard. Sometimes he doesn't. So, like, sometimes 7 of 9 felt like 7 of 9, but then she's not. But I don't know what happened to her. She's just there. Sometimes it feels like Star Trek. It's like, this is Star Trek. Yes, that's great. There's the Energizer beam. It seems like the Energizer beam from TNG, but upgraded to nowadays. So it looks fucking beautiful. I love the Energizer beam. The control panels look like the TNG control panel stuff a little bit, but then they look upgraded because it's 20 years later, so that makes sense. And we're not on a starship, so that makes sense. So that seems like Star Trek to me. Data, meeting with Picard in his dreams, that seems like Star Trek to me. Their interactions were great. Patrick Stewart, or Picard rather, having Irumodic syndrome, that's good. That's sort of Star Trek. There's also setting up if something happens to Patrick Stewart in the future. Like, that's very nice of them to do that. It makes sense. The starships, I guess, seem okay. I haven't really seen it yet. I'm a little worried though, because I saw they use the Discovery version of Enterprise, but they use the Enterprise original from TNG, so it's like very bizarre. So it's kind of like watching this is like torture. Like, I can't stop watching, but it's like the more I watch, the more, they're the fucking hubris and the shit, this and that. Like, I don't know, man. The references to banging and sex and fornicating and bathrooms and killing, it's all just so dark. Everything is dark and sad. There's no neutral zone anymore, apparently. Oh, my God. It's just, there's no fun, really. There's a little bit of fun thrown in there, but it's still all dark and depressing and sad and stoic. There's no in TNG, it was, oh my God. I mean, I know that it's not your TNG, it's not that. Okay, I get it. But it is more like the movies. If it is more like the movies of Next Generation, the 4 Next Gen movies, if you want to compare it to anything. But because the movies were a little bit different than the TV show. Everybody was acting a little more, everything was a little darker, everything was a little funnier. There was more comedy and darkness in the movies than there were in some of the TV shows were pretty dark, though. But even in the darkness of the TV shows, like, there was that outcome that was so good. So things were resolved quick, so everything was really cool. Like, there are 4 lights. Like, that was a fucking torture episode. This guy's getting tortured. And it was terrible to see that happen. But, if you did that in this series, if somebody kidnapped Picard and they tortured him, but the problem is, in this show, they would just torture him for nothing. It would just be like he's tortured, and they'd show him being shocked and cut and all this grotesque stuff. But in that episode with the 4 lights, there was such a message in that. Like, that's the thing. There was a message and a story, and that's what made that episode great. But in this, there wouldn't really be that. It would just be Picard is being held captive because someone blames him for something, and then they cut him and torture him and electrocute his balls and stuff like that. And then he would get rescued and they'd get out of there. And that would be the story, that somebody held him accountable for something, tortured him, killed him, or wanted to kill him, and all these things, and then they escaped. But in that episode of the TNG, there's a meaning in there. There's a message. You know what I mean? There's a reason for the story. I don't know, but there's just nothing to this. It's all just darkness and action and Kurtzman and anyway, I'm just making this because I'm depressed. I didn't make one after the first episode, really. I didn't make one well, I did after the first one. I loved the first one, I think. I talked about how happy I was and everything. But yeah, this has really depressed me. And that's my anyway, that's where we are, episode 5. 5 episodes in, and I wanna watch the. I mean, it doesn't really ruin. It sort of doesn't ruin Star Trek for me all the way, but it does a little bit. It kind of does, because I don't understand what I'm looking at. It's they refuse to hire people that know Star Trek. They only want to hire people that want to tell stories that are new. Or I'm literally just broken, man. Everything that we ever loved is destroyed. And you're seeing it in the ratings. You're seeing it in the movie ticket sales for some movies. And you're seeing it in the fan outrage. And I wonder when Hollywood is going to know what they're doing. I feel like if I was at the table, the writer's table for this show, if I could have said, listen, we just need to change about 20% of this. And it won't impact too much of the story you're trying to tell. But if you just change about 20% of this a little bit differently, we can really almost perfectly adhere to Star Trek and not alienate the real core fans, There's a couple million people that we could probably not alienate and get to watch the show and buy all the merch and be so into it for years to come if we just alter about 20% of this. And I feel like if I had been hired to do that, or somebody else better than me had been hired to do it, they could have really saved this a lot better. But we'll see what happens. First episode I thought was pretty good for the most part. But then as we see the real Star Trek universe we're in, it just begins to de-evolve. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I'll have more later. Star Trek Picard, I'm out of here.